Somewhere, deep within the wilderness of the 6th console generation lies something forgotten. And French.
It's Halloween again, and as promised last year, after Dead Space, we're going back to something obscure. Literally, we're going to be playing the first 2 obscure games from Hydrovision Entertainment. Let's start with the first, and we're going to be playing the PC version available on Steam for this review. ObsCure follows a very, very, very bad night for students Josh, Stan, Kenny, Shannon, and Ashley as their antiquated school descends into plant-based chaos. If you so choose, you could get the console version on PlayStation 2, however, you will pay a pretty penny for that privilege. The game opens with Kenny practicing basketball shots when, out of the blue, someone steals his bag and he's forced to give chase, leading him into an underground basement lair right out of Raccoon City. It's cheesy, it's a bit silly, but it does work as a tutorial stage quite nicely. After a short, harrowing chase, Kenny gets taken out by the Monster Squad, and the game flash cuts to the next day where his friends, convinced there's a conspiracy afoot due to the large number of strange events going on, go on the prowl after hours to get to the bottom of things. Instead of finding the principal engaging in an illicit affair with his secretary, the gang finds shadow people, plant monsters, decay, and other horrors beyond their imaginations. The game is somewhat clunky, but it works. Actually, it works quite well if I'm honest with you. There's a good variety of weapons to spice up the combat, mostly things you'd expect to find at a school, like sports bats and other equipment like that. But then there's also, certain things to remind you that this game is set in America. Like, there are a lot of guns. Lots and lots of guns on this school property. You always play as 2 characters, and for good reason. Each one has a unique ability. For example, Josh will say if there's still an item to be discovered in a room, Stan can pick locks, Shannon gives a healing boost, and Ashley hits like a goddamn truck injected with steroids. It's a surprisingly decent gameplay element, with different characters being used in different areas, but in such a way that there is no wrong answer to any scenario. I found myself mostly playing as Shannon and Stan due to their abilities, but early on I was also using Josh while getting to grips with things. Overall, the game builds a solid foundation. It's by no means a masterpiece, but it's far from bad. Also of note, crafting weapons and item management skills are essential here. To properly dispose of most enemies, you have to bathe them in light and then shoot. Easiest way of course is to break a window, but as the story progresses and day turns to night, you'll need to use a flashlight to weaken your foes. Of course, this entails using tape to strap it to a gun, which brings in some rather rewarding exploration. I only really have one big gripe with this game, and that's the plot. It's by no means a bad story, it's just paced very, very poorly. It turns out that the whole school was built on top of a laboratory run by the principal, Friedman, whose brother is now a tree after being exposed to the MacGuffin mortophilia flower the pair found in Africa. Said flower makes people into, well, these things, and is generally a bad thing. Of course, all of our protagonists are now exposed and have to find a cure, or face becoming monsters themselves. And sure, this sounds amazing, but by the time all of this comes to light, the game is mostly over. Seriously, you can beat ObsCure in around, give or take 4 hours, with it nearly all being done by the time you actually get to that underground laboratory where it just sort of ends. Friedman's brother shows up, and the boss fight, should you use Ashley like a smart person, is very easy and, well, yeah, done and dusted. There's a little teaser ending to set up a sequel and a good cut to black, but honestly, yeah, it's overall just fine. Just fine. It's nothing exceptional, but it's a good platform to launch a series from. Which brings us nicely to the sequel, ObsCure: The Aftermath. Now, many of you will immediately notice that we're playing this on Wii and not PC. And you may be wondering, hey, why are you doing that? ObsCure 2 is available on Steam. Well, as it turns out, the PC version is, I'll tell you what, let's just roll this clip from our good friend Cursed Riparia to show you exactly the sort of problems you can expect to run into.
Did she just die? What's going on? What's going on? The screen's all black and I can't do anything.
The poor thing. When is this carnage going to stop?
Did the game just break?
Amy! No! Amy!
What the fuck? What even just happened? I couldn't see shit.
The messed up part is that the PC port is still for sale in this state, but after some googling and talking to the fanbase, the consensus seemed to be that the Wii version is the best console version, so here we are. Opening with Stan, who is no longer speaking like J-Rock from the Trailer Park Boys, narrating over the events years ago from the first game, we go to a totally unrelated college dorm where 4 new characters, Corey, May, Sven, and Amy, are smoking a random flower they found for reasons. What? One of these flowers? This? What about this makes you want to ingest it? It looks like how an ashtray tastes. One bad trip in and wow, okay, first impressions are interesting. Since we're on the Wii, motion controls are, of course, in full force, so to attack with a physical weapon, you have to swing the remote. It's not too awful, given that the weapon swings do correlate with the remote. The problem is that it's a bit delayed, and naturally, the gimmick gets old fast. Firearm aiming also takes a hot minute to get used to, and the camera, since it follows the remote, has a habit of making some wild swings. But thankfully, this opening scene gets out of the way pretty quickly, and to save, you have to inhale the flower. Okay, must admit, the ragdolling made me chuckle a little bit there. Despite being a sequel, this still feels very janky, and matters only get worse when returning character Kenny and Amy shows up. It's kind of dark, it's hard to get an exact grip on your objectives, and the voice acting is, well, the word I want is shit.
I'm hurt and they've killed my boyfriend. It will soon be your turn. Take the gun in the billiards room.
Really, really shit. Around here is where shit starts to go sideways. It turns out that the party Kenny and the blonde broke into was sharing the mortophilia drugs. He's still suffering for the events of the first game. Everyone else is kind of just here for the ride, and yeah, the plot is, again, kind of bad, but we'll go into it more later, because first I have to tackle the gameplay itself and what's changed from 1 to 2. First up, the characters are, ability-wise, mostly duplicates of each other. Kenny and Sven are both strength characters. May and Amy are decrypting characters, with May having a slight advantage with hacking, and Corey climbs stuff. Later on, Stan and Shannon from the first game become playable. Stan retains his lockpicking ability, but Shannon is very, very different. The first quarter of the game generally retreads the same themes as the first, only this time there's permanent character death in the form of May's sister, June, being an unavoidable loss, even if the game taunts you with a countdown timer making you think that you can save her. I would say that it's a product of its time, but no, by this point, I think most devs had worked out that this bait and switch stuff is naff. And this is the part where we go down a deep, dark rabbit hole. This game tries to deal with some very heavy subject matter and spectacularly fumbles it. Now, with that warning out of the way, let's continue on with the plot. Scrambling around the hospital for pills, Kenny starts to let go and... Wait, is that Shannon from the first game? Why is she all ebony, dementia, darkness, raven way now? Whatever. She tries comforting her brother, who ends up exploding into a mid-2000s new metal music video effect. From this point on, Kenny becomes the primary antagonist. Well, I mean, barring the plant. A bunch of fumbling later, and you're up to the first fight with Mutant Kenny, who promptly kills May because... reasons? I'll be honest, the game makes a big deal of her dying, but she and Amy are literally carbon copies of each other. Actually, come to think of it, now Corey and Sven. They're all just stereotypes pulled out of an American college film with generic racial tropes attached to them. May is Asian, so she must be a hacker. Sven is apparently Norwegian, so he must be big strong man. Corey is skater boy, quote unquote, so he must do dumb stuff and have an energy drink problem. And Amy is, I said it, she's worse May. It's supposed to be a big deal when the game starts killing off the cast, but I'll be honest with you, it's very hard to care when the characters are just so boring. With May gone, Stan and Shannon are now fully playable, and horrible voice acting aside, they're actually somewhat interesting to play as. Well, they would be if the controls didn't ruin them. Stan retains his lock-picking ability from the first game, but now it's a minigame instead of an automagic hold A deal. The idea is simple. Insert the pin into the lock, move the springs inside the cylinder into position, and kablam, open sesame. The issue is that you have to keep the Wii Remote pointed inside the lock while you do this, but you also have to move the Wii Remote forward. All of a sudden, this seemingly simple task becomes an utter nightmare, because the pointer just doesn't want to stay inside the damn circle while nudging the springs around, and it's just abhorrently difficult. But because of this ability, Stan becomes one of the most useful characters, so you better get the hang of it, and fast. Shannon, on the other hand, can inhale the black spores by grabbing them? I don't know, sometimes this grabbing hand thing works fine, sometimes it just didn't. It's not as bad as the lockpicking, but it's still rather awkward. For the record, I did troubleshoot my hardware, just to make sure there was nothing wrong on my end. I made sure I was at the optimal distance away from my screen, I have a brand new Wii sensor bar, fresh batteries in here, and of course I did do a test on a game that I know works fine, namely Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition, and guess what? That game worked flawlessly. The game meanders on a lot after May's death. There's not really much to say, plot-wise, it just feels very much like it wants to go through the motions. But then it totally subverts and tries to tackle a serious topic that it is not equipped to deal with. Again, this is a title where this passes as a good take in voice acting.
I suddenly feel really tired.
This is, and I cannot stress this enough, a game that should be tackling heavy subjects like, I don't know, drug addiction or sexual assault. Yet, this is what it tastelessly does. The gang get a second round with Kenny after finding Amy alone in a rundown dam, and there's no way around it. Just here's a clip.
Check on the blonde. I wasn't too gentle with her.
Ugh! What did you do to her, you bastard? Somebody please blow his freaking head
I
off!
thought I taught you to respect women, Kenny.
This is not how you should ever, seriously, ever approach a topic like this in a story. It's cheap, it's poorly executed, and frankly, it just feels exploitative. It's made even worse by the immediate scene after when Amy's VA drops this peach of a take.
Try to forget about it.
I feel dirty.
The sad thing is that this isn't even the first time the game does this. Prior, when Stan had a heart-to-heart with Shannon about the issue since the events of Leafmore with drugs, her response was basically, El Mayo, just don't be an addict, dummy. I want to stress that video games can and should be able to approach topics like this in a serious manner that doesn't make light of them. I mean, for Christ's sake, ObsCure 2 had the perfect example to look up to in, yeah, obviously. What irritates me beyond belief is that everything that happens in the plot after this revolves around this. Christ, it even rips off Silent Hill 2's female form monsters, but totally misses the fucking point of them. Bloody Nora. And it's not like it gets any better, for the record. After some god-awful rowing that straight up goes in any other direction than the direction you want to bloody go, all of a sudden, we're in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. No, really, a new baddie shows up, Jebediah, who is apparently Friedman's son or something. I've tuned out the plot at this point, and I just want it done. Sven gets the meat hook death right out of the first Toby Hooper film. It's all very somber, something Chainsaw Massacre 2 boss fight, and credits. Wait, isn't Kenny still alive? Yes, that credit roll was indeed a bait and switch. After the wrap-up with the teacher that's been helping the kids escape double-crossing them in the name of a secret society, apparently, you play as Stan and Shannon as they go after Corey in an attempt to save the now heavily plant-pregnant Amy from a fraternity. No, that's the plot. Sigma, Delta, Beta, new males taking over the world or some shit. There's a few puzzles that are basic enough, and a really annoying bit where the game takes away your weapons, but the real pain in the ass is the final encounter with Kenny, lording over a defeated Corey early in the morning light. Hey, remember in the first game how sunlight made the buggers explode? Yeah, the developers forgot about that too. Kenny taunts Corey, expecting him to embrace the spores within him and turn, but oh god, here we go. The game's about to try and be fucking sincere again. Oh, handled with the serenity and grace of a brick. I really don't want to come across as insensitive when it comes to these topics, by the way. It's just, when they're presented this poorly, the only way I can process it is with sheer disdain and disbelief. And now, the final showdown. The fight isn't actually too hard, but it becomes a huge chore when the game forces in Stan and Shannon's gimmicks. See, to damage Kenny, you have to drop something really heavy on him, like the stadium lights. To do that, you need to pull switches, which is straightforward enough since it's easy enough to get him into a down state, but what makes it 10 times harder is that 2 of those switches are behind, you guessed it, mini-games. Shannon's, being the least bothersome, is straightforward enough to do, but lockpicking while have to deal with this rampaging monster is utterly morale-crushing. It doesn't help too that the AI partner will sometimes just stand there, even if they have multiple weapons loaded with ammunition, and just do, absolutely nothing. Oh, and to add on, once in a while, the game will just crash for reasons. It's an obnoxious, stupid fight compounded with gameplay and performance issues that are oddly motivating to me. Maybe it's just that I want to see this over and done with. Maybe there's something wrong with me in their head. Whatever it is, the final switch gets pulled, Kenny gets taken out once and for all, and the game is over. Oh, also, all of a sudden, the writers remember that these things hate sunlight, and Amy fucking explodes in the helicopter. Something, cliffhanger, game done, roll credits. Well, that was awful. And for more than one reason. Mainly because ObsCure 1 had built a nice little platform with a little bit of promise and then completely squandered it. And it's kind of funny because they also clearly wasted their talents, because shortly after this game came out, Hydrovision went out of business, drowning in a series of Wii shovelware titles. There is technically a third game called Final Exam, which is a beat-em-up in a totally different art style, which I'll guess we'll have to get around to another time, but it was made by a different company called Mighty Rocket Productions. I believe this was the same team who put out the newer PC version of ObsCure 1 that I played on Steam. They released that in 2016, but since then, they've also shut down, leaving little to no hope for anything else. Not that there should be anything after this. ObsCure died for a reason, and frankly, it needs to stay that way. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some sleeping to catch up on.